I manage properties. We manage like 700. Having said that, we do not know the truth with a capital T. We're learning stuff all the time. We can help with a bunch of stuff, but take what I say with a grain of salt. There are, a bunch of ways to skin a cat. I'm going to tell you what I think is the best way to do some things and the best way to engage with investors. And so if you have any questions, let me know. If you have any thoughts or concerns or advice or anything else, also I'm all ears. We do, this is a great thing, working with investor clients. This home practically pays for itself. It's located on a very windy street next to an ATM machine. It's like investors sometimes want it all, and we sometimes love to sell all that to them. We were just having a conversation. It's kind of like we're getting into the spot in the market where it can be tough to make numbers work for investors. So we'll talk through a couple of ways of evaluating properties and discussing how investors think through stuff. But be careful of promising everything. About me, about investors. What we're going to cover in this thing is accurate rental analysis in a couple of minutes. I'll show you how we do it and how you guys can do it with your own tools. A couple of formulas for evaluating rentals. I think we only have 3, sorry. I want to talk through a couple of investment strategies, when an investor calls us and says, like, what are my options? We say there are a couple of things you can do. There's the high yield play, there's the middle of the road, and then there's the kind of higher value property that doesn't yield as well, but you can kind of retire on it with your pro forma hitting your or your reality matching your pro forma more closely. So we'll talk through some of that. We'll talk through a couple of tips for working with a bunch of different types of investors. And then please stop me if you have any questions. Email me, that's my email address, matt@keyrentertulsa.com. I don't do any sales anymore. I've outsourced that to a great person in my office named Lisa. And so if you have investors that you want, we can talk through this too. If you have investors that you want us to talk to, I'm happy to talk to them, but it feels like I'm pulling the rug out from underneath the person that I've empowered to do this in my office, and so I don't generally do that. So I'll talk through, but when it comes time to like talking numbers and stuff, I'll pass it along. So don't be offended if that happens and I do that. I'll let it be known ahead of time. About me, when I originally did the presentation here at Supreme Lending, my friend and associate put this photo up of me. This is from me at my bachelor party when I was single. We were in Mexico and I had a little bit of wine, beer, or whatever it was. And I was like, longingly looking out into the whatever I was looking at on some river. Now I'm married. I've got 2 twin girls that were born 5 weeks ago, Ariana and Simone. If you meet my wife, don't tell her I didn't put a photo of her on here, but those little babies are really cute. What's that? They look just like her, I hope, because if they look like me, we're all in trouble. Owner of Keyrenter, Tulsa. We manage about 700 units, a touch over, single family, multifamily. We have a bunch of people that we rely on in our office that make the world go round for us, and so that's super helpful. I know you guys work with Gerardo, I think. We've got a bunch of guys that are capable. You guys also work with Gerardo. Super capable, good decision makers. We also rely on a ton of subcontractors and a ton of maintenance guys, so we're grateful for all of their help. I own a portfolio here in Tulsa and also in Colorado, so I know a thing or two about investing. I started as an investor before I opened up a business that was managing property, and we were buying in Colorado back when it made sense. It's crazy now, and I wouldn't advise anybody to do it. If you have cash, park it somewhere in Tulsa, not in Colorado. We buy stuff in kind of between MLK and Sheridan, 244 to Pine. I love that area. It's a great spot for investment properties. Also buy in the Pearl District historically. I don't anymore, but there still are deals to be found that you can renovate and do good things with. We've led a bunch of syndications for apartment complexes, so I can tell you about that. I'm also all about figuring out how I can help. So if you want an operating agreement that we spent thousands of dollars building with Fred Dorwart's office downtown for a syndication, let me know, let's talk. If you want the GP or the LP operating agreements, I've got all of it. Ping me if you want a standard operating agreement because your investor says, hey, I'm forming an LLC. I can send it to you. It's not a big deal. All this stuff is like in the purview of attorneys that are charging a whole bunch of money. I'd rather just give you guys whatever helps your investors do it for less money. And a shout out to State Farm too. What Matt says is totally true. If you can position yourself as the expert in multiple fields, not just selling a property, but like, hey, I can help you think through how you can save money. State Farm is 100%, unless you're going into a commercial thing with where you're going to Chubb and 500 properties on a single family basis and up to 4 units. State Farm is by far the cheapest in town. I've heard that outside of Oklahoma, they're not the cheapest always, but we pass a lot of stuff over and go, just save a little bit of money. It doesn't hurt to save some money for similar coverage. I can talk to you all about partnerships in various ways. We've partnered in 100 different ways to buy stuff. And so I can talk to you about that. I don't know anything about selling a property. I literally have never sold one in my life. We have quite a few in Colorado. We've never sold anything here in Tulsa either. I worked previously at McKinsey & Company. It's a consulting firm that does a lot of kind of high-level strategic consulting. I was in Dubai. It was fun. We did corporate finance and kind of family strategy for businesses that were family-run that were trying to transition through to the second or third generation. So that's about me. I'll stop there with that. Investors come in all shapes and sizes. So if you are chasing a big fish, it's a good place to be, but the guy that comes to you or the girl that comes to you and wants to buy one property is a fantastic place to be. We have a bunch of people that are clients and they might have a single investment property for a year or two. They may have inherited it. They don't really want to be in the business and they realize, wow, all of a sudden this really helps me taking depreciation and interest expense on my tax return. It's really helpful in excess of what I earn cash-wise, which is also nice. And they end up buying more stuff. There are people in this room that came to us kind of frazzled and frantic about evictions and not having control of their property necessarily, and they're now buying more properties, which is awesome. And so we can help with some of that stuff. For people that originally start out small but have bigger dreams, they can be great clients for you guys over the course of a decade or more, right? People like to buy, and when it goes right, they like to buy more. We work with a ton of investors, as you would expect. Some come as realtor referrals. A couple of things. We're happy to work with your investors. If you send us your investors, we will send them back to you when you want to sell them more property or when they want to sell what they already have. Our intention is to be long-term partners. We're in this for the next 3 decades or 4 decades, not to like steal your $3,000 commission check today, I promise you. And so we're happy to point them back to you. If we can help you manage properties better because you want to do this, you are realtors, you can manage properties. If you think that that's a worthwhile use of your time, I'm happy to kind of share tips and tricks on how we do stuff. There are some things that we're happy to share. There are other things that we're not. Like we do a zero security deposit thing through a company. I prefer the only people in Tulsa that do it. And we're insured on the back end through a relationship that we have. I'd rather not tell you how we do it, but we have a great system and it's pretty unique. But on the other stuff, like we use AppFolio. It doesn't make sense if you manage 5, but if you manage 50 or more, it probably does. We pay $4,000 a month for it. At some level, it makes sense for different scales. You can pay less, whatever. We use Tenant Turner for self-showings, and I can talk to you about the merits of all that stuff. So if you want to build a management business, I'm happy to tell you or teach you what we do and help and have you do it yourself. At some point, I'll probably come knocking and try to buy your business, but that's a different story. You can also clip a coupon then. Yeah, exactly. Like I do like to buy other businesses. So you build it to 50 or 70. When it's a headache, we'll buy it from you, no problem, and pay you going rate. So in rental rates, how do you guys determine at this point if somebody comes in and says, I want to buy this house? And like, frankly, let's be honest, right? If we have an investor, they usually come to us and go, here's a Zillow thing. What do you think about this property? Is that right? I mean, like you can also set them up on the MLS and you can say, oh, perfect. I know Candace, I know you like this kind of caliber of asset, but in general, are they not just being like, hey, can you set me up for this? Or can you tell me what you think of that? So do people ask you, what do you think I can rent this for? Yes? How do you right now like tell them? You go to the MLS?
I think there's a website, Rentometer.
Rentometer, perfect. Yeah. How else do you guys do it?
Normally it's about the 1% of the value of the property normally, but we use that.
So 1% is perfect, and that's what you would expect to get. But what if somebody lives in? If they show you a property at I don't know, like in Bixby, it's a $300,000 property. Are you going to get $3,000 a month of rent? I'm like, maybe not. So 1% is definitely valuable for analyzing whether a property makes sense as an investment. But from how else do you do rental analysis? Anybody else?
To something else that's for rent.
Beautiful. And how do you find those? Yeah, comps. How do you find the comps?
Looking at the properties around and see how much.
And where do you drive? Do you drive around the neighborhood and?
No, I mean that's what MLS.
Beautiful. Okay, cool. So Rentometer is a great tool. Rentometer is like, depending on the confidence interval or whatever, it's a great tool. I think there are neighborhoods where it works really well, and there are neighborhoods where it like doesn't work well. And oftentimes you have to go 5 miles, and you know that if you're at 71st in Lewis or at the river, 91st in the river, like what's within 5 miles is a lot of different stuff. And so you're not gonna have very accurate numbers, I don't think. The MLS is a great place to go. If you go to Matrix and then go to the whatever that first tab is and go down to leasing, that's a great way to do it. You can put in an address and do any sort of radius, just like a sale, just like doing a CMA for a sale. There's also a website called Rent Range, and I think they charge like $3 or $5 per whatever report that they run, but they look very professional and they're great. Investors love them. And then we also, I mean, we have 700 properties in Appfolio, so we know just generally, like, there's probably not a neighborhood where we don't have something that's similar, so we can tell you a general range, and you're welcome to call us and we'll give you our thoughts. And then there's also, Appfolio, if you use Appfolio, they have, I don't know, it's 1 million or 2 properties online, and so they have a lot of stuff. Tracy Strike from Renter's Place doesn't use them, sorry. Accent Property Management uses them. There's a bunch of companies in town that do use them, and so they have other stuff in the portfolio that they sanitize, and they just will give you they'll give you comps from the system, so we can help with that. But a couple things to consider. Just like a CMA, you're gonna check bath, bed, square footage, the year built. What you're essentially doing is saying, if you were a tenant, what are my other options, right? Because you can't sell something for $900 that everything else is going for $700 a month. It just doesn't make sense. It's like people will go, no, I'll just go to that option. And we run into it sometimes where we have really nice renovations in like substandard neighborhoods where we've done everything new and we're trying to market stuff for $575 and the nearest comp is like $350, and somebody comes in, they're like, well, I can get that for $350, and you're like, but can't you see how different this is? And sometimes it just doesn't hold. People are like, I don't care. Like, I'd rather go for $350. And you're like, okay, I may have wasted some of my money. But so you're looking at that. You're looking at location, condition of the property, the amenities associated with the property. Does it have a fully fenced-in yard? How does the porch look? The whole thing. And then, as I said before, look at it as if you're a renter looking for a rental, right? Because people come to me, your 1% rule type of thing. People often say to me when I have meetings, like, well, I need $1,500 to make my numbers work on the mortgage. And I'm like, that's tough because a renter doesn't care what your mortgage is. If you're on a 15-year amortization and you could be on a 30 and you're paying twice as much a month, does a renter care? A renter would be like, the one down the street's on a 40-year amortization with an insurance company. Like, that's cheaper and better. What do I care about you? So you have to do it as if you're them, looking at everything in the area. And you have to also say some people are agnostic as to whether they live in an apartment or a house, a duplex, or whatever. And so there's a lot of different competition. So again, if you're going to do it by kind of looking at the comps, go to the internet, Google it, Zillow, HotPads, Craigslist, Facebook. And my opinion is that when you go on Zillow and you see the side profile and you look at like a house that's probably in a good neighborhood, probably attractive, but they use those, they're like, the lights are all off and the colors are dingy and everything else, it's miserable. We have Tammy Molinaro from Trademark Photos. She's not the only photographer in town, but we do all of our photography through her. So if you see properties that we've marketed, they all look awesome. And sometimes we get feedback that's like, well, the photos are way nicer than the property. I'd rather have that when somebody went to look at the property than the other way around where people don't look at it, because photos make all the difference in the world. And then the question obviously is, with any given budget, would this unit appeal to you, right? I mean, people will live in the most expensive house that they can afford. And that includes what they expect utilities and other things to be at. So if your investor says, should I upgrade windows or should I put a new HVAC in or whatever else, there's some merit to be said, like you need return on investment for sure, but tenants will look at it and go, oh, they're all window units. I know window units are expensive. Or I know that a mini split is a little bit cheaper or more expensive than a central air system or whatever, and they'll factor that into what they're going to end up paying at the end of the month, and they're going to live again in the most expensive place they can afford. So let's do an example of a property. This is a Jenks property. These owners have like 15 properties with us, 3-bed, 2-bath. They do everything super nice. They like to take great pride in their property. We just took this portfolio over like 3 months ago, and this was a property that we just leased. So you can see on this MLS search that everything is pretty tight, right? It's not like you have some in the $1,100 range and some in the $1,500 range. So we know, based like intuitively looking at this, I know that the property is going to be in the $1,350 to $1,450 range, right? And some of it is based on kind of the price per square foot and whatever else. So what did we do? Here we looked, here's another thing. This is Rentometer, by the way. Sorry, this is Rent Range, sorry, by the way. It's like $3-4 a pop. You can run these things and it looks really professional, right? It's a great little tool. Also will give you a confidence interval. And so if the confidence interval is like 60, I wouldn't run with it. But if it's a 91, you know that things are pretty tight for the area. And again, like everything here within a 1 mile radius is 1450. You really can't see that, can you? Am I like blind from close? Yeah, you can see it better from far. But like everything is in the 1375 to 1450 range. So you know, generally speaking, that it's going to be there. We like to price it a little bit higher. We like to see if there's a spike, like we pop it up at the top, and if somebody bites early on, we're happy to take a higher price and push rents up in the neighborhood. If not, we'll drop it down $25, $50 a week until we have somebody that'll do it. That'll do it at that price. This property is unique in that Brad Sides from McGraw, who does beautiful renovations for his people, gave this to us. And this is for an investor of his, and we had basically nothing in the area that comped at all similar to this. So when he's done with it, the hardwoods look beautiful, the bathrooms look really nice, the granite on the kitchen and the stainless steel appliances show well, they photograph well, but it doesn't have any landscaping. It's a small house, it's a 3-1, which is essentially functionally obsolete, but whatever. And everything in the neighborhood was like, what are the prices here? Are like $795, $895. Like there's nothing that really hit the numbers that he wanted, that this guy wanted. And we were like, well, none of this stuff really comps. So compared to this, there's this. So then this one is $795. It's also less than a mile away, but it's just like, it just doesn't show nearly as well. So we're like, what do we do? How do we take this house? How do we take this house and comp it to this house? And the answer is kind of like swag. What does swag stand for? Like sophisticated wild ass guess? Like just like, what do we think this thing will go for? And we kind of talk to people and go, hey, in our office and go, what is other stuff going for in this market that we would list at that looks like this? And kind of go, oh, I don't know, 1250? Perfect. And he goes, and the investor goes, those numbers work for me. So we listed it at 1250. We marketed it on the 5th. We leased it on we got an application on the 16th and we had it signed on the 21st. That's like $300-400 more than anything else in the neighborhood. Cool. That's a great question. We rarely get except for some of these Jinx properties, we rarely get more than 2. I mean, like 2 units, whether it's a couple or a group of friends or whatever. We had one the other day, obviously in Jinx. My first question was, why have we priced it like this? We got 7 applications, and I was like, add a pet fee, add whatever you can to make these numbers work, because it's just clearly if you have 7 applications, you've priced it way too low. So sometimes we get it wrong, right? And then we backpedal a little bit and try to see how we can. And we go to tenants and go, hey, we got 7 applications. Are you willing to pay $50 more? And they go, no. Perfect. Next one. Are you willing to pay $50 more? And eventually somebody will be, right? Somebody recognizes that everything else in the neighborhoods is not up to par or snuff, and they do it. So when you can't find rent comparables, that's just a bad thing for your investors. Your investors want to know with some certainty what their return is going to be on these properties. And so you can't go to them and just say, I have no idea. And sometimes we say it's a swag and we're going to go high and we're going to work our way down, and we might let it sit on Zillow for 2 or 3 or 4 days and then start bringing it down quickly. We could look, I think this is $100 too high, and let's bring it down $25 every 3 or 4 days and keep a close eye on it. But you should have some idea of what to do. There's my swag. So look at the closest property that you think matches, and you also will need to use your minds to say I know that this neighborhood and this neighborhood, while they're not geographically proximate, are similar in characteristic, right? And so say this should be in the $1,200 range or whatever it is. Determine whether your product is better or worse, obviously, and then make sure that your photos are awesome. And that's what I said. Test the marketing for a bit and adjust, because oftentimes you can get, if you price it $50 higher and there's been somebody waiting for something like your property or your investor's property to come on the market, they might just jump at it and pay $50 or $100 more than they otherwise would have, because there's something else, because there's nothing else on the market. Sorry. Okay, so to your point about the 1% rule, a bunch of ways for valuing rentals. The 1% rule, cash flow, cap rate, and then cash on cash return. Does anybody not know what these terms mean? Should I explain them before we go through the exercises? Everyone good? Which one don't you know?
The cash on cash.
Okay, so back in my days at McKinsey, this is really funny. We had an owner, there was a Qatari-based company that did like billions of dollars of revenue. And they had multiple segments. One was like a watch, luxury watch. So they had Patek Philippe and they had Panerai and all these brands. And then they had a marine division. And there were two separate businesses run by two sons of the founding guy. And he was like, Matt, he didn't understand that there's a return based on the cash you put into a project. So he's like, both of these businesses make $100 million a year. And I'm like, cool, that's great. How much have you invested in this marine business? And how much have you invested in this watch business? He's like, well, we've invested 10 million in the watch business and we've invested $1 billion in the marine business. Well, if you had invested $1 billion and you got $100 million back, it'd be different than if you had invested 10 million and you were getting $100 million back a year, right? That's your cash on cash return. Like you can use bank leverage, you can use all cash to buy something, but what's your return on the cash that I've got in the deal? If I put in $1, am I getting back 50 cents a year or am I getting back $10 a year? It's
Is this like for a year?
it's an annual metric. I mean, I guess a lifetime you'd have to discount it for, time value of money and whatever, but yeah, it would be an annual thing. I think frankly you can just use it kind of monthly, am I right? And go compound it. I mean, I think of it generally as I make $300 a month and then I annualize it and I make $3,600 a year and I've got $10,000 in the deal. We'll run through an exercise, but does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, so the 1% rule is a very kind of order of magnitude first level of analysis. It's like, generally speaking, does that make sense? And the 1% is the bar to say the monthly rent is 1% of the cost of acquisition. So if you buy something for $100,000, $1,000 would be a decent return for that. $1,000 would be a decent monthly rental rate on a property. And you might say, like, $1,200 is great and $800 is my break even where I make nothing, but $1,000, 1% is generally speaking what you would kind of aspire for on the front end. And again, there are certainly neighborhoods where you can go to 2%. We can talk about the value of that and the downfall of that. And then there's neighborhoods where you have safe bets at 80 basis points, at 0.8%. But in essence, this is a rule of thumb used to determine if the monthly rent earned from a piece of investment property will exceed the property's monthly mortgage payment. And so the aim of the 1% rule is to have the rent be greater or equal to the mortgage payment so the investor breaks even on the property at the worst. The answer is it really comes from interest that's 7 to 10%. And so if you're in a 4%, conventional, what are rates now right now, Mark? For a 30-year fixed note? Is that true? Oh, wow. So I didn't know that. So I'll tell you, we're looking at rates.
In the city, right here at this office.
Is it true? Okay, so I think rates are generally speaking in the 3 to 4 range. It depends on your credit. It depends on how much equity you want to put down. I don't know. That's really Mark's business. I don't understand mortgages fully, but that's my thought. If they're half of this, then your 1% rule is going to crush it because your 30-year fixed note is it's going to, your rent is going to far surpass what you need to pay for your mortgage. And so here you go. 4% rates, you can cash flow at 6.6 to 0.8%. So let's do an example. This is actually a client of ours that bought a property recently, 1686 South Pecan in Broken Arrow. This is an interesting deal. I'll tell you about it. But essentially, it was listed at 110. It needs like 10 to 12K worth of work. And we closed at $95,000. So the total acquisition price really is 95. This is probably, it's like 95 plus $2,000 or $3,000 in closing costs. And we theoretically will put in at some point money. We haven't put in anything yet. And market rates are 1,000 or 1,100 to 1,150. This meets the 1% rule. If he's able to get 1,150 and the house he's in it for 107K, once we redo the roof and fix some of the soffit and fascia and other stuff, that's a great return. In reality, what happened with this is the tenants that live in there are like hoarders, so they didn't want to move. So we took rents from $800 to $1,200. They signed a lease, and we agreed to do $5,000 worth of work on the outside. So that's like a really solid investment for him. He'll be at $1,200 on $100,000 is a great place to be. Uses and limitation. As I said, it's a great way to see if it makes sense, like prima facie, early on. Is this like generally speaking, if you're looking at a deal and it's $300K and you can get $1,500 worth of rent, tell your investor this is not the right property. You might want to live in this home, but it's probably not the right property to cash flow. It's not going to be the place you make money. It's easy to compare different properties. So if you're looking at 2 in the same neighborhood, we're buying, for example, for 2 different investors right now, properties at like 14th Street on the east side of town. One's at 62 and one's at 49. They're literally 2 doors down from each other. So the rents are not going to be dramatically different. The returns that those investors want or desire are different, right? One's a retired guy that wants essentially 8-9% on his cash. The other guy's a more aggressive investor that's willing to say no until he gets the right desperate seller. So it's you can compare, but if I look at the same $750 of rent on $61,000 and on $49,000, your returns are significantly different. You can see that they're different. It's easy to compare different properties. The 1% rule does not take into account any renovations or higher than expected expense ratio. So if you need to do renovations, put that on like I did on the pecan example. It's not 1150 over 95,000. It's 1150 over your total basis in the property, which if you have to do work includes that work. It's also, if there's a I don't know what the exact expense ratio is, but if you go into a house and you're renting it, you buy it for 20 grand and you rent it for $400, that's 2%. In reality, what's going to happen? You have non-payment of rent. The quality of tenant that you put in at $400 is going to indicate to you that you're probably not going to collect all your rent. There's probably going to be a bunch of plumbing issues where the toilet stops up and you have to go fix that and you pull up the bathroom floor to do this. They're going to leave at some point because there's no AC in that unit and they're tired of it in summer, so they'll live there in winter with a base floor unit. But your numbers aren't going to look the same. So if your expense ratio is way higher than kind of standard stuff, and we use 35-40% generally speaking, it's multifamily. On single family we use much lower. We use like 5% vacancy and probably 10% expense ratio. Then if the numbers are wildly off, it's going to skew your ability to make the numbers work when you're already in the investment. The last thing you want, and what we say to owners when they want to buy property is, come to us and let us tell you about the property before you buy it, whether you're buying it from us or otherwise, because the realtor has a vested interest in selling you the property right now. We have a vested interest in making it work long term. If you guys tell them up front, we want to have a long-term relationship with you, let me run these rental comps for you so you know that we're not just selling you this property for today, that will go very far with an investor. They know that you're on their side, that you're not just trying to clip a coupon. You are all the things that they want you to be, you are. You're here to make them money kind of starting today for the future, not just because you have something, a vested interest for you. So talk to them about these sorts of things, the 1% rule, educate them, come to us for rental comps. We'll send you all of them through if you don't want to do them yourself. But from the 1% rule that you need to dig a little bit deeper. More research is needed. You need to dig a little bit deeper and see whether this is indeed a deal that is worth pursuing or not, right? Because again, if you go into a property that meets the 1% rule, but you find out that there's just the HVAC is going to cost $7,000 because it's a 22 system and it needs to be 410 and whatever else, you need to change everything out. That's going to skew your numbers dramatically. Sorry. Is it ready to share? Why does it do this? Start sharing. Any questions on 1% rule before we go to cash flow? Cool. So cash flow is the monthly rent minus the monthly expenses. Like broadly speaking, if you're going to make $1,000 but $500 goes out, then you've got $500 left in your pocket. Is that good or bad? I don't really know. Depends, right? So what's important is that you accurately account for monthly expenses. If you're running through the numbers with an investor, it's super easy, and I don't want to just sell your services without your approval. But it's easy to kind of say, Mark, on this sort of loan, what would I be paying a month in a scenario without interest rates, but between 3 and 5%? What's my monthly principal and interest? Easy to go do the work for them and say, this is what the assessor site says that the taxes are if you're buying it above or below. Calculate a ratio, an expense ratio for the taxes, and tell them it's going to be $50 a year or $150 a year or whatever it would be. And then it's easy to say, I know from my relationship with Matt McCoy at State Farm that rental policies at State Farm are going to be between $40 and $60. Put it into a pro forma. I'm happy to share with you a pro forma. We use a bunch of them that are some simple, some more complex. Email me and I'll shoot you some that you can pop to them and go, hey, this is what I think your monthly cash flow would be. The question then is, what do you use if you don't know any of the expenses? You can kind of fudge it, or you can do a more sophisticated approach like the one I said. So this is an example of a property that I bought a while ago. We bought it for $12,500. We put in like 55 worth of work, but essentially what the numbers look like in the end, it rents for $825. We pay $412 on a $57,000 note, commercial note. Tax and insurance are $75. Maintenance is $50, which is high and estimated. Honestly, we don't do any maintenance because we did everything brand new. But for the sake of the exercise, I put in maintenance. Vacancy, $41, which is 5% in essence. And then property management of $83 is 10%. We cash flow at the end of the month, $204. But again, the question is this good? $2,448, is it good? And we'll talk about this on the cash on cash return perspective later. If I'm in this thing for $50,000 or for $75,000 cash, it's probably not good, right? 75 on this is a 3.5% return. This is what it looks like. We'll go through it later, or we'll go through the thing later. But I'll tell you from this perspective, these are our numbers. We've got 19,000 of equity in the deal, 7,000 of cash. The return on equity is 13%. The return on asset is 3%. And then again, we'll talk about the cash on cash return because I'm okay with an ROE of 13% if I have no cash in the deal. In this case, we have 7, so it's strong. The limitations are so what you don't want to do is just say your rent is this and your mortgage payment is that, and therefore you have some money back because it excludes all sorts of other expenses. And then the question is cash flow always important? If you could go back and buy something in LA 10 years ago and you had to pay $1,200 a year, but you had that property in LA a decade later and you could sell it for an extra $3 million or $4 million, would you buy it? So does cash flow matter in that case? No, you go, perfect, I'll give you $1,200 a year and you give me $3 million at the end of a decade. Is it dying on me? Connecting to base unit. Start sharing. So your cash on cash return is what's important. It's the cash flow in the deal divided by the cash you have in the deal. And it's determining cash flow that is important. It's the monthly rent minus your management, your taxes, insurance, your vacancy, your maintenance, and then your debt service. So you want to make sure that when you calculate your cash return, unlike a cap rate, which we'll discuss next, you want to put your debt service in there. So here's an example. Okay. Hold on. I don't know how to do this. So here, stop sharing, start sharing. Okay, so back to this property, 76 grand, we've got a loan of 57, equity in the deal is just defined as what the loan is divided by the property value, the property value minus the loan is the equity. We've got 7 grand in the deal. If we have a 7 grand in the deal, but we're doing what I said, $2,450 in cash, it's a 35% cash on cash return. Meaning if I put my dollar in the stock market today, is there any company that you can reliably say will give you 35% return next year? And frankly, it's not cash. It's just it's an amount that you think you have on paper you've got, but you've got to cash out and sell the asset to actually get that cash back, which is why real estate's a great thing. So I'm okay, even though I've got 7 grand in the deal and it sits there and I'd rather be in $0, I'm okay with that, 35% cash yield. Let's go through because I'm running out of time. Cap rate is another way. It's predominantly used in multifamily, but it's a good way to take out your financing from the decision as to whether a property is good or bad. And it's essentially net operating income divided by your total cost basis. You can have an ingoing cap rate and a stabilized cap rate. So you can say I'm buying this at a 7 and I hope to operate it after I do a bunch of work, raise rents, cut expenses. I want to operate it at a 10 cap. That's possible for sure. And then it's mostly used in multifamily. So if you buy an investment property all cash and you for $100 for each, if you buy a multifamily property for all cash and you put $100 in, what is the profit per year after you've paid your expenses is what this is asking. It's the way you finance it, whether you're all in cash and you don't pay any mortgage payment or whether you're in for 100% mortgage debt, then that is irrelevant to the discussion of a cap rate. That's what you're trying to do is take out the financing discussion and say this property and this property are apples to apples compared based on the net operating income of the property and the asset value. In other words, financing expenses are below the line, so the cap rate takes the financing component out. So let's just say, I want to go through this quickly, but the net operating income, I want to use this example here. This is a real property that we manage. I haven't put any real details. I've tried to sanitize it. There's 7 units downtown. It makes 42 grand. $12,000 in expenses for the most part, $30,000 in net operating income. So the value that you would ascribe to this property if you wanted to go and buy this, or you wanted to determine what your value was, would be $30,000 divided by some denominator. You can do the same math by saying 30,000 divided by 9% gives you the value. 30,000 divided by 8% gives you a better value. Generally speaking, a higher cap rate is a better investment opportunity for the buyer, but at the same time, it might indicate that there's kind of sketchy things with the property. Like, why would somebody sell at $333, which is a 9 cap, when they could sell at $600, which is a 5 cap? Probably because the income is less assured, right? Or the neighborhood's not that great, or whatever else. But essentially, this owner could go and say, I want to buy this at a 7 cap, or I think it's worth a 7 cap, because he knows what other properties in the market go for. He says, look, other multifamilies have traded at 7 caps or 9 caps or whatever it is, and therefore I would put a 7.5 cap on mine, and it would be worth something like $400,000. And you would do the same as a buyer. You'd say, show me your net operating income. Why am I going to pay you a 10 cap on this, or why am I going to pay you this when I should pay you that, right? Am I out of time, Mark?
Yeah, we need to probably.
Okay, I wanted to say one thing. Okay, there's a couple of things on types of investors. Keep in mind that investors come in all shapes and sizes. You want to talk to them the way they want to be spoken to. Some people, want to, they are renting their former primary residence, and they want to make sure that they have cash flow. Other people want to make sure that they have, that they can park their money and not lose money. Some people are going to want management. Some people aren't. Some people you can help by, like the long-term investor, if you can introduce them to people, that's going to be super helpful to them to build their network and help them and build relationships and people that can help them go about their journey and buying stuff over the next couple of decades. Be a resource for question. They'll be loyal if they know they can trust you, but they might be living off the cash flow from the property, which makes it difficult to introduce new and creative things. They don't want to do too much renovation because they're living off of it, and so the idea of kind of buying a property and then putting a bunch of cash into it can be sometimes anathema to their long-term goals. High net worth guys, they've got a bunch of holdings across multiple asset classes. They might buy in all sorts of different states, potentially international, and they have a large appetite for passive income. You can help by bringing them deals, doing a bunch of the legwork, running rental comps, making them feel like they're safe in doing these deals. They probably won't be loyal to you, but anyone that can help them, they're gonna do business with. For us, I'll skip this. This is what we do. If you want to know about it, you can ask me, and I'm done. Sorry to rush through the last bit. I'm here for questions. Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy to chat Q&A.
Go.
So as far as the people that you're working for, do you see a lot of people reinvesting the cash flow into future projects, or do you see more people living off of the cash flow?
We rarely see people living off the cash flow. We deal with a lot of out-of-state investors. Once I deploy the money to their account, I don't know what they're doing with it, but I see a lot of people come back. And we help them, or they buy their first 2 properties, and then a year later, 18 months later, they're like, okay, I've saved up the next tranche of capital and I'm ready to keep going. I don't get the feeling that we manage a couple of properties for owners in town that have like a bunch of fourplexes, and they used to live in one side, now they moved out, so now and it's like, yeah, I think they do live to some extent off the capital, and they're not interested in buying more. So they like somehow came up with these, or they were, they inherited them, or they bought them when the price was really low or whatever, and they're not interested in buying more. But generally speaking, I think our guys that are investors and girls that are investors are not living off the cash flow. They're bundling that cash. They see the benefit, and then they come in and dump it more. And it could be in our market, it could be other places. I mean, we have a lot of guys that are doing deals all over the country, and they just look for a good property manager. They come to us because they say, I found your Google reviews or whatever. They're looking for a good property management company that's honest and will help do their bidding in their respective towns, and that's it. That's all they want.
I've seen Matt really convince investors to continue to be an investor, because once he took the properties off their hands, it was like, so I just need to go earn, save, and buy the next one.
Yeah.
And absolutely, and I've seen our personal friend of ours that just really, he's got him going, and others, breath of fresh air coming in and just let them go do what they do and let Matt do what he does. And that's a great partnership for you selling the properties and him taking care of the properties. So that's a great partnership between. We had a question over here. Go ahead.
Yeah, how do you price your services? And like, if I were to be talking to somebody who's out of state and they're like, hey, I want to do some investment, but of course they don't want to keep flying back and forth.
Yep.
How would I tell them that you would be like, how do I describe your service?
So we charge 10% of rents, and we charge $6.95 for the leasing fee. A lot of people in town do like a 75% or a 1 month rent for the leasing. Fundamentally, we say like the role, the job, the work is the same whether you are renting a $3,500 house on Brookside or a $500 house somewhere else. So like we price it the same way. So we say it's 10% of rents and $6.95 for the service of leasing the property. With that comes a bunch of guarantees. We'll lease it in 2 weeks, or the first month of management is free. You got to talk to Lisa, but we have a whole bunch of things that we didn't historically do, but now we do. The tenant is guaranteed for the duration of the lease, so we're not going to fundamentally. We're at odds if we say we're going to put somebody in, take a leasing fee, they leave. We're going to put somebody in, take a leasing fee, they leave. So we guarantee the lease for the duration of the period.
10% of what?
10% of the rents collected. So we also sometimes we put in a minimum, but we will never take a fee if the owner's not making money. So we might say your property rents for $500 a month. We take our minimum is 50, 65, 75, I don't know, it's on the website, dollars per month. However, if the property's not rented, we're not going to charge you money. So we're not making money unless you make money, but there's a minimum. It's just not worth it for us to manage a property that's like a headache and is poorly maintained. So we have a bunch of minimum standards that we require, and then we say it's a $75 minimum charge.
You want to pretty much just take on slumlords.
It's more like it's less about the quality of the property, and as you say, more about the mentality of the owner.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to
take someone on and bring them up to your
correct.
level. Yeah.
Correct. If somebody refuses to do work, man, I think to one person, if somebody refuses to do work, we'll just drop them over time and say look, it just can't. If you refuse to consistently provide air conditioning for your tenant in the heat of summer, there's just nothing we can do together. But I don't mind. We have very low income properties, and as long as the owner's willing to take care of them and make sure. I would say we specialize in having quality properties for quality people. That can be in any income bracket. It's just you have to be a decent person living in a decent home, and we'll make sure that they're kind of both.
Matt,
I wanted to say something real quick.
Sure.
Matt manages all of our properties. And I don't even know how everything we have they handle, but the thing that's the best is the communication. So I work State Farm all day, every day is what I do. I raise kids, I do my family. I get emails from he and his team. If I want to go in there and get the nitty gritty, it's there for me. If I don't have to. So I have worked with other property managers. They are hands down way easier. You trust them. The trust factor, because I've had ones that have not been trustworthy and have taken money, and so I highly recommend these guys. They can work with you in the Spanish market. They've got a lot of, you got 3 or 4 that all speak Spanish.
Only 2 that don't. Yeah,
The majority, they all do. So
Matt does.
yeah, that's a what's the most interesting
Eric
man in the
is-
world. But highly recommend. They have taken our property. They've actually raised our rents over time with our people. So it's really recommend those guys, 100%. Firsthand, just
Thank you.
bad experience turns to a good experience.
Thank you.
So it'll give you a taste for more real estate, that's for sure. Last question, Kenny, did you have something?
There's one here too.
Yeah, how do you handle maintenance when y'all do it?
So it just depends. Anything that's a traded issue, like a electrician or an HVAC or a plumber, we've got great relationships with a bunch of HVAC guys and plumbers and electricians. I would say I was at a discussion the other day with Tracy Strike and Charlie from Bailey Forestell, who manages 800 himself, and they were like, the hardest thing right now is finding maintenance guys. And I was like, that's crazy. It's super easy for us to find maintenance guys. We, as a business, I'd rather have 1 or 2 guys that will do night calls, midnight on a Saturday, and not charge us extra and give us preferential rates on their base hourly rate, than have 15 guys that we send intermittent work to. So we work with Frank Woods from Stay Cool Heating and Air. We work with Michael Evans at Sooner Quality. We will do all of the maintenance that is required on a license trade through them. For non-licensed stuff, it really depends. We sometimes sub it out. We sometimes do it with guys that are in-house, and other times it's like just 1099 folks. So it really depends. I'd rather send if there's a small plumbing issue that I think there's not a need for having a plumber go out, I'd rather not send a $75 or $80 an hour guy out. I'd rather send a $45 an hour guy out. The problem fundamentally is I could send out a $45 an hour guy, and then he tells me a plumber needs to do it. So it's really on a case-by-case thing. We would, generally speaking, we say, hey, Mr. Owner, Mrs. Owner, this is what's going on. We're gonna take the following approach. If you disagree, then let me know. We're handling it, but if you know that your appliance was broken all along and the tenant moved in that way, like there was one burner of 4 that doesn't work, like, and you don't really want to fix it, it's not a life and death thing, I'm not going to force the issue. You'll respond and go, hey, that burner's been broken for years. Tell them to forget about it and use the other one, and I'll give them, $5 off the rent or whatever, right? But so the long answer I gave you, the short answer is a bunch of different ways. Some on staff, some 1099, and then all of our licensed guys are just 1099.
Well, cool. Matt's going to stick around, and you guys grab his business card, exchange cards. Hey, next event is first Thursdays. So the first Thursday of every month, we go to happy hour for our realtors. Not sure of the location this month because we've kind of been moving to different restaurants. So we will definitely reach out to you and let you know where and when. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you guys. Thank you very much.